The first week of university was chaos. Freshers' fairs, icebreaker games, and people pretending to be far more confident than they really were. I was one of them. I'd come to Manchester to study communications, armed with 2 suitcases, a half-functioning kettle, and the faint hope that university life might somehow make me less awkward. It was drizzling that morning, because of course it was, when I first saw him. I was standing at the campus coffee stand, clutching my umbrella and wondering if caffeine could fix social anxiety. Ahead of me, a guy with messy brown hair and a navy hoodie was arguing with the barista about his drink. "This latte tastes like burnt dreams," he said, grimacing dramatically. "Can I exchange it for one that doesn't taste like despair?" The girl behind the counter rolled her eyes. "That'll be another £2, mate." He groaned like he'd just been personally betrayed by capitalism. I laughed, not politely but properly. The kind of laugh that escapes before you can stop it. He turned, and for a second I forgot what breathing was. "You get it," he said, grinning at me like we'd shared an inside joke all our lives. "I do," I managed. "I've had worse, though. Once bought a cappuccino that tasted like melted socks." He laughed, loud, carefree, entirely unembarrassed. "Melted socks. Brilliant. You've got standards?" "Mate, Lewis," I said, holding out my hand. "Jamie," he replied, shaking it with the confidence of someone who'd never been shy a day in his life. "Mechanical engineering, which basically means I'll spend the next 3 years covered in grease and caffeine." "Communications," I said, "which means I'll talk too much and still get misunderstood." He snorted. Perfect combo. That was how it started, a joke about burnt coffee and bad degrees. By the end of the first week, we were inseparable. He was the kind of person who filled every silence with something. A story, a question, a stupid pun. And somehow never made it feel forced. I'd never met anyone so effortlessly alive. He dragged me everywhere. To late-night kebab runs on Oxford Road. To film society screenings where he loudly whispered plot twists halfway through. To impromptu football matches in the rain that left us both soaked and laughing like idiots. My quiet, careful world started to stretch around him. I found myself doing things I'd normally avoid, like crashing a house, party, or staying up until 3 a.m. just talking on my flat's balcony while the city hummed below us. He had this way of making even silence comfortable. Sometimes he'd flop down on my sofa, half asleep, muttering about lectures or deadlines, and I'd just sit there, reading, typing, pretending not to notice how the sound of his breathing steadied me. Before long, his stuff started to appear around my flat. A phone charger on my bedside table, a half-eaten bag of crisps on my desk, and most memorably, his gray hoodie. He left it behind one night after a film marathon. It smelled faintly of rain and coffee and something I couldn't name but found impossible to throw into the wash. I told myself I'd return it next time I saw him, but I never did. It hung over my desk chair, a soft reminder that he'd been there. Our friendship became a kind of rhythm. Inside jokes, mock arguments, shared playlists, and long walks through the city center after dark. He'd talk about his big plans. "I'll build a car that runs on leftover kebab grease," and I'd tell him he'd end up on the news for all the wrong reasons. But under the laughter, something else was growing. Something quiet and frightening. It started small. The way his arm brushed mine when we walked, the way he'd grin when I said something sarcastic, the way he'd sit too close on the couch, legs sprawled, like the space between us didn't exist. Once, during a group study session, he fell asleep beside me on the sofa, head tilted just enough that his hair brushed my shoulder. I should have moved. Instead, I sat there, pretending to keep typing while my heart thudded too loudly for a quiet room. I told myself it was nothing. He was my best mate, straight as a ruler. That kind of thought was dangerous, pointless, unfair, so I buried it under jokes, sarcasm, and the safety of friendship. Still, the hoodie stayed on my chair. Things changed around the end of term. He'd been talking to someone from one of his labs. Chloe, a third year who always seemed to know exactly what to say and how to say it. She was confident, the kind of confident that made people turn when she entered a room. He mentioned her casually at first. "Met this girl. She's into classic cars and probably smarter than me," and I pretended not to care. But the first time I saw them together, my stomach twisted. We were sitting outside the student union when she showed up. Long brown hair, a flash of red lipstick, voice warm but sharp. She kissed him on the cheek, and suddenly I felt like a spare part in my own story. "Lewis, right?" she said, sizing me up with that polite smile people use when they're not sure if you're a threat. "Yeah," I replied. "Nice to meet you." Jamie talks about you all the time, she said. Her tone light but her eyes assessing. You two spend a lot of time together, don't you? Yeah, I said again, unsure what else to add. She smiled wider. That's sweet. Sweet. The word stung more than it should have. Jamie, oblivious as always, laughed. Don't scare him off, Chloe. He's fragile. Fragile, I said. Charming, she winked. Only teasing. But something in her look told me she wasn't. That night, after they left, I sat in my flat staring at his hoodie. It was still draped over my chair, soft and ordinary. But it didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt like a ghost of something I couldn't admit to wanting. As weeks went on, Jamie became harder to pin down. He still texted, still showed up sometimes with his messy hair and stupid grin. But there were gaps now. Empty hours where he used to be. When he did come over, he talked about Chloe, her sense of humor, her quick temper, her family's summer house by the coast. I listened, smiling when I was supposed to, nodding when he said her name like it meant something solid. But inside, everything felt hollow. One night after he'd left, I finally picked up the hoodie. It still smelled faintly like him. Rain, coffee, the ghost of late-night laughter. I pressed it to my face, just once, before folding it neatly and tucking it away in my wardrobe. I told myself it was time to stop being ridiculous. But as I stood there, the city lights flickering through the blinds, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, a quiet fault line under the surface of our friendship. I didn't know it then, but that was the start of the storm. Chloe had a way of filling a room, not with laughter, but with control. She was clever, confident, always dressed like she'd just stepped out of a glossy magazine and into a world that somehow already belonged to her. When she spoke, people listened, not because she was warm, but because she made you feel you should. At first, I wanted to like her. Honestly, I tried. She made Jamie happy. Or at least that's what I told myself. When he was with her, he looked steadier somehow, less restless. She'd take his hand mid-sentence or finish his jokes, and he'd flash her that grin that used to be mine alone to earn. So I smiled, nodded, laughed when she laughed, pretended not to notice how often she looked at me like I was something she needed to understand, or erase. It started subtly. One evening we were all at Jamie's flat, eating takeaway, and half watching some crime drama he'd insisted was so bad it's genius. Chloe perched on the arm of the sofa beside him, legs crossed neatly, her perfume faint but sharp. So, "Louis," she said suddenly, her voice light and curious. "You seeing anyone these days?" Jamie looked up from his chips. "He's married to his degree," he teased. Chloe tilted her head, smiling that polished smile. "Or maybe he's just waiting for someone special. You know, someone who really gets him." It was harmless on the surface, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Guess so," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm not really in a rush," she smiled wider. "Oh, I imagine not. You must get a lot of attention, though, being the token gay friend and all." The room went quiet for a beat. Jamie's eyebrows furrowed. "Chloe," he said lightly, but there was a warning underneath. "Oh, relax," she laughed, brushing his shoulder. "It's just a joke." "Right," I muttered, forcing a laugh I didn't feel. "Hilarious." Jamie caught my eye, his expression apologetic, but the moment passed too quickly for it to mean anything. The conversation moved on. My pulse didn't. That night, when I got home, I saw his gray hoodie draped over my chair again. He'd left it after our last film night, before Chloe started coming around. I picked it up and stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the seams. It still smelled faintly like him. Rain, coffee, something safe. Now it just felt like proof that he'd been here once. Over the next few weeks, I saw less and less of him. He stopped showing up at random hours with a bag of crisps and a dumb grin. Our late-night kebab runs vanished. The messages that used to flood my phone every few hours, "You up? You alive? Coffee?" became fewer, shorter. Sometimes he'd forget to reply altogether. When we did meet, Chloe was always there. And when she wasn't, she hovered, through texts, through glances at her phone, through the faint tension that followed every time it buzzed. One Friday evening, he invited me out for drinks with their group. I said yes, desperate to see him properly again. But the night felt off, like I'd stepped into someone else's life and didn't quite belong there. Chloe was in rare form, witty, radiant, the center of gravity around which everything revolved. I sat opposite them, nursing a pint that tasted like regret, watching her hand drift to Jamie's knee every few minutes. She leaned forward halfway through a story, eyes gleaming. Do you remember the time Jamie nearly got suspended in first year? He groaned. Don't. Oh, come on, it's funny, she said, turning to me. He tried to fix the lab door lock and nearly blew the fuse box. Everyone thought the fire alarm was real. I laughed, genuinely, that time. That sounds about right. He's always been that way, she said fondly. All heart, no planning. Then, with a small smirk, you probably know that better than anyone. Jamie chuckled, but I caught the flicker of something else in her eyes. A quiet claim of ownership. A reminder. Later, when I went to pay my tab, I passed by the corridor that led to the toilets, and stopped. Their voices drifted from the other side of the wall, low but unmistakable. People are starting to talk, Jamie, Chloe was saying, sharp edges tucked beneath soft words. About what? About you two. Me and Lewis? His voice rose slightly, incredulous. Don't act like you don't notice it. You're always with him. Always defending him. Always. She trailed off, the silence heavier than her words. For God's sake, Chloe, Jamie snapped. He's my mate, is he? She pressed. Because I've seen how you look at him. It's not normal. The words hit like static under my skin. There was a pause, then the scrape of a chair. You're reading too much into it, he said, quieter now. Am I? Something in her tone, wounded, jealous, certain, made me take a step back. My throat was tight, my palms clammy. I didn't want to hear any more. I walked out into the cool air, my heart pounding like I'd run miles. When Jamie texted later, "You left early? Everything okay?" I typed out a dozen versions of "yeah, just tired," before settling on "all good." He replied with a thumbs up. No words. That was the moment I knew something had cracked. The days that followed felt like wading through fog. He was still there, in group chats, in lectures, passing me on campus, but not really there. Every conversation felt thinner, like we were pretending to be who we used to be. I missed the small things. The way he'd steal chips off my plate without asking. The way he'd lean his head back when he laughed too hard. The way he'd text me song lyrics at 2 a.m. and expect a full analysis. Now he just sent things like "busy today," "talk later," or "can't make it tonight." He wasn't lying. I saw his Instagram stories. Late dinners with Chloe, study sessions, weekend trips to London. But every post felt like a reminder that I'd been replaced. One evening, after another unanswered message, I sat on the couch staring at my phone, willing it to light up. It didn't. The flat was quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. The gray hoodie still hung over the back of my chair, untouched for weeks. I could almost see the ghost of him there, sprawled across the sofa, one arm over his eyes, muttering about deadlines. I'd tease him, throw a crisp at him. He'd grin. "You love me really, mate." And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I did. The next time we saw each other, it was at the library. He spotted me first, waving me over with that easy smile I'd missed. For a moment, things felt normal again. "Hey," he said, pushing a stack of notes aside. "Haven't seen you in ages." "Yeah," I said, sitting opposite him. "Guess someone's been busy." He winced. "Sorry, mate. Things have been, complicated." "With Chloe," I said flatly. He hesitated, then nodded. "She's just intense sometimes." "Thinks I'm not giving her enough attention," I tried to smile. Hard to compete with a communications degree. He laughed, and for a second the tension eased. Then his phone buzzed. "Chloe." He looked at it, then back at me. "I should go," I finished for him. "Yeah, of course," he frowned, guilt flickering across his face. "We'll hang out properly soon, yeah?" "Sure," I said, but I knew we wouldn't. He left in a rush, the door swinging shut behind him. I stared at the empty chair, the dent in the cushion where he'd been. The smell of his aftershave lingered faintly in the air. Something sharp and warm that made the space feel smaller without him in it. When I got home that night, I sat on the edge of my couch staring at the spot where he used to nap. Curled up, drooling, muttering nonsense in his sleep. It was empty now, and so was the air around me. I thought about the first time I'd met him. About the coffee, the laughter, the ease of it all. How simple it had been to exist beside him before everything got complicated. The hoodie still hung over my chair, soft and silent. I picked it up and pressed my thumb along the sleeve, tracing the faint wear of the fabric. It was still warm from the last time he'd worn it. Or maybe I just imagined that. Either way, I realized then that something between us had shifted too far to fix. And yet, part of me couldn't stop waiting for him to come back through that door. Unannounced, grinning, holding a coffee and saying something stupid like, "You miss me, don't you?" The silence answered for him. The night it all came apart didn't look like a disaster waiting to happen. It looked like every other student party, Too many people crammed into one semi-detached house near Fallowfield. The air thick with cheap aftershave, stale beer, and the thrum of bass heavy enough to rattle your chest. Jamie had texted me earlier that day. "Come out tonight, mate." "You never do anymore." I almost said no. Then I didn't. Maybe I missed him more than I wanted to admit. When I arrived, the place was already alive. Lights flashing, voices echoing through the halls, someone yelling about losing their drink before finding it again seconds later. I scanned the crowd until I spotted him near the kitchen, pint in hand, grinning mid-story to a circle of half-listening friends. He looked relaxed, unbothered, until his eyes met mine. For a moment, something softened. He raised his glass in a lazy salute. I smiled back and started towards him. But before I got close, she appeared. Chloe. She slipped her arm around his waist like she was planting a flag. Her eyes followed me as I approached, polite, cool, and sharp enough to cut. "Lewis," she called over the music, too sweet. "Didn't think we'd see you here." "Yeah, well," I said, trying to sound casual. "Couldn't miss one of Jamie's infamous nights." "Infamous," he says. Jamie laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "You want a drink?" "Sure." He disappeared into the crowd toward the kitchen, and just like that, it was the two of us. Chloe smiled thinly. "So, you came." "I said I would," I replied. "Right." She took a sip of her drink. "You and Jamie are close," I shrugged. "We've known each other a while." Her gaze lingered. "It's just, people talk, you know?" I frowned. "About what?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. "About how you look at him. About how he looks at you." The words hit like a punch wrapped in silk. "I don't know what you think you've seen." "Oh, I've seen plenty." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've got to back off, Lewis. He's trying to move forward, and you're holding him in place." My throat tightened. "You're serious?" "I am," she said simply. "Jamie's too kind to tell you himself, but you need to give him space. Let him breathe." I stared at her, the music pounding through the walls, my pulse matching its rhythm. "I'm his friend," I said slowly. She tilted her head. "Are you?" That did it. Without another word, I turned and walked away, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the sudden blur of lights and laughter around me. The cold air hit me hard when I stepped outside. Sharp, damp, real. I stood there on the back patio, breathing it in like it might wash the anger off me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or laugh. Maybe both. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes before the door creaked open again. "Lewis?" His voice. I turned. Jamie stood in the doorway, hair mussed, eyes wide with worry. "What happened?" he asked, stepping forward. "Chloe said you stormed off." "I didn't storm," I said, though my voice was unsteady. "I just didn't feel like being told to back off by your girlfriend." His brow furrowed. "What?" "She told me I'm apparently ruining your life. That you need space. That people are talking." I let out a hollow laugh. "She's got a real way with words." He dragged a hand through his hair, muttering a curse. "Bloody hell. Is she wrong?" I asked before I could stop myself. "What?" "No. Because if she is, you might want to tell her that. She seems pretty sure you're sick of me." He stepped closer, frustration flickering across his face. "I'm not sick of you, Lewis. She's jealous, all right? She thinks there's more going on than there is. And is there?" The question hung there, heavy, dangerous. He blinked, caught off guard. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know what we are anymore. One minute we're inseparable, the next you vanish for weeks and show up pretending nothing's changed. That's not fair, isn't it?" My voice cracked. "You don't call. You barely reply. You let her treat me like I'm something you need to hide." He looked away, jaw tight. "She's been pressuring me, all right? She made me choose tonight. Between you and her." My chest went cold. "What?" "She said if I didn't stop spending time with you, she was done." He laughed bitterly. "Like it's that simple. Like friendship's a bloody light switch. And what did you say?" He hesitated. "I told her I didn't want to lose either of you." Guess that didn't go over well. "No," he said quietly. "It didn't." I stared at him, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. He looked wrecked, like someone pulled in two directions until something inside him began to tear. "You could have told me," I said softly, "instead of leaving me to figure it out from her. I didn't want to drag you into it. Too late." He let out a shaky breath, turning away slightly. "I'm just tired, Lewis. Tired of all of it. Of her, of me, of pretending to be something I'm not even sure I am anymore." The words slipped out so quietly I almost missed them. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "I don't know. I used to think I had everything sorted. Who I was, what I wanted. But lately I can't even look in the mirror without feeling like I'm faking it." Something inside me twisted. Fear, hope, confusion, all at once. Jamie, he cut me off. She says I've changed. Maybe I have. Maybe it's because of you. Maybe it's not. I don't bloody know. The silence between us thickened, filled with the low hum of music from inside, the sound of wind pushing through the trees. I never asked you to change, I whispered. I know. He met my eyes, his expression raw. That's the worst part. You didn't ask for anything, and I still... He stopped himself, biting down on the words. I stepped forward, close enough to see the tremor in his hands. Still what? He laughed softly, bitterly. Still think about you when I shouldn't. The world seemed to tilt, the noise of the party fading until there was nothing left but the space between us. I couldn't speak. Neither could he. For a long moment we just stood there, two people caught in a truth too heavy to hold. Then somehow, we moved. I don't know who started it. Maybe him, maybe me. 1 second we were standing apart and the next his hand brushed mine, hesitant, trembling. My breath caught. He didn't pull away. Our eyes met. His red from tears or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. And then he leaned in. The kiss wasn't cinematic. It wasn't perfect. It was shaky, clumsy, soaked in confusion. But it was real. Every breath, every heartbeat, every unspoken word we'd been swallowing for months collided in that one impossible moment. It lasted only a few seconds, but it rewrote everything. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide with shock, and something else I couldn't name. Jamie, I started, my voice barely a whisper. He stumbled backwards, shaking his head. I shouldn't have done that. Wait, I can't. His voice cracked. I don't know what's happening to me. You don't have to know, I said quickly, reaching for him. We can just... No. He stepped away, running both hands through his hair. If I stay, I'll make it worse. You already did, I said before I could stop myself. He flinched. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry, and turned towards the door. The click of it closing behind him was louder than the music still thumping inside. I stood there, frozen, the taste of him still on my lips. The night air felt heavier now, pressing down on me from all sides. Inside, laughter carried on like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just split open in the space between us. I sank onto the low wall by the garden, head in my hands. My chest hurt, not in the sharp way of heartbreak, but in the deep, dull ache of something that had been waiting to break for too long. After a while, I went home. I don't even remember the walk back, just the blur of city lights and rain, and the ghost of his voice replaying in my head. When I reached my flat, I found his hoodie still draped over my chair, untouched. I sat beside it, staring at the fabric like it might hold an answer. It didn't. I pressed my thumb to the sleeve, tracing the worn threads, and whispered into the empty room. What have you done to me? But there was no reply, just silence, thick, final, endless. And I knew then, as certain as the rain on the window, that nothing between us would ever be the same again. Days blurred together after that night. Long, colorless stretches where everything looked the same but nothing felt right. Jamie didn't text, didn't call, didn't show up. At first I told myself he just needed time, a few days maybe, to untangle what had happened. But as the silence stretched into a week, that hope began to rot into something else. The quiet, hollow ache of being erased. I saw him once across campus, walking with a group from his course. His laughter carried easily through the courtyard. Too loud, too deliberate. When our eyes met, it was only for a second. He looked away like I was a stranger. That single glance burned more than any argument ever could. I tried to keep busy. Assignments, library shifts, late-night walks through the drizzle. But everything reminded me of him. The smell of coffee drifting from the campus cafe. The gray hoodie still hanging on the back of my chair. Even the stupid playlists he'd made me that now sat on my phone like ghosts of another life. Everywhere I turned, he was there, except where I needed him to be. By the third week, I'd started to believe the silence was permanent. Then one evening, scrolling aimlessly through Instagram, I saw it, a photo of him and Chloe. She was smiling, perfect, composed. And he stood beside her with his arm around her shoulder, expression tight but passable. The caption read, "We all make mistakes. Glad we found our way back." The comments were a blur of congratulations and heart emojis, but I only saw his face. There was something wrong in his eyes. Not sadness exactly, but exhaustion. like he'd been holding his breath for weeks and didn't know how to let it out. I closed the app, my pulse still racing. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the rain tapping softly against the window pane. The sound reminded me of the way his breath had trembled that night before he left. I told myself I'd move on, delete the photos, stop replaying every word we'd said. But when the knock came, sharp, hesitant, familiar, I knew immediately it was him. It was close to midnight. When I opened the door, he stood there drenched, hair sticking to his forehead, hoodie zipped halfway but soaked through. His eyes were tired, dark around the edges. "Hey," he said quietly. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. "Jamie." He shoved his hands into his pockets like a boy caught doing something he shouldn't. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Yeah, of course." He walked in slowly, his trainers squeaking against the floor. The air between us was thick, too full of everything unsaid. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "You look like hell." He laughed once, a hollow sound. "Feel worse. Where's Chloe?" He hesitated. "Gone," I frowned. "Gone where?" He sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the floor. "Home, said she needed space. And you came here." He looked up, guilt flickering in his expression. "Yeah, I didn't know where else to go." There it was again. That same sentence from before. The one that always broke something inside me. "You could have texted," I said quietly. "I know. I wanted to, 12 times, but I didn't know what to say." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Everything I say lately seems to make things worse." "Then don't say anything," I murmured. "Just sit." He nodded, exhaling shakily. For a while, the only sound was the rain outside. Soft, persistent, steady. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I can't stop thinking about that night." My heart stuttered. "Jamie, let me finish," he said, almost pleading. "I've tried to bury it, pretend it was nothing. Just stress, just confusion. But it won't go away. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. The look on your face, the rain, everything." I sat down beside him, not too close, not too far. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't keep pretending," he said, voice breaking on the word. "She saw it in me. Chloe, she said I wasn't really there anymore. That half of me was somewhere else, with you." His hands were trembling. I wanted to reach out, to still them, but I didn't. "Not yet." "She asked if I was in love with you," he continued, barely above a whisper. "And I told her she was wrong, but even while I said it, I wasn't sure." The words hung between us like electricity. I swallowed hard. "You don't have to say that." "But it's the truth," he said quickly, "or at least part of it. I don't know what I feel, Louis. I just know it's there, and it's ruining me." He laughed then, a small broken sound. "I hate that you make everything make sense, and I hate that I need you to." Something inside me cracked. The anger, the sadness, the endless waiting, all of it collapsing into one deep ache. "Jamie," I said softly, "you don't have to hate it. You don't even have to understand it. You just have to let yourself feel it." He looked at me, eyes wet, desperate. "And what if feeling it means losing everything else? My friends, my family, my whole bloody life? Then maybe it's worth finding out who you are underneath all that," I said. He shook his head. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," I admitted, "but pretending's worse." He leaned back, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore." "You're human," I said. "That's enough." He let out a shuddering breath, then lowered his hands. The silence stretched again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was fragile, careful. Like something alive that might shatter if we breathed too hard. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, its rhythm tapping against the glass like a heartbeat. He stared at it for a long time. "Do you ever wish we could just start over?" "All the time," I said, "and if we did, I'd probably still end up here," I replied, "trying to convince you you're not broken." That drew a small smile from him. Faint, fleeting, but real. He turned toward me fully then, eyes red-rimmed but clear. "You always say the right thing." "I just say what's true." "Yeah," he murmured. "That's what scares me." We sat there like that, the world shrinking down to the sound of rain and breathing. For a moment, I thought he might reach for me again. His hand twitched slightly, hovering halfway between us, and instinctively mine did too. This time, neither of us pulled away. Our fingers met, hesitant at first, then steady, the contact simple but electric. The rain filled the silence, soft and constant. He exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. I don't know what happens next. Maybe we don't need to know yet, I said. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on our joined hands. Feels real, though. It is, I whispered, even if it's not simple. We stayed like that side by side, the storm murmuring outside while something gentler settled inside. It wasn't a grand moment. No music, no confessions that would make sense to anyone else. Just two people sitting in the half-dark, holding on because everything else had fallen apart. The chaos had finally given way to quiet, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't hurt. Time, as it turned out, didn't fix things, but it softened them. The weeks after that night were quiet in a way that didn't feel empty anymore. Jamie didn't disappear this time. He didn't call often, didn't text much, but when he did, it was steady. Small, ordinary messages that meant more than they said. You around? Got a spare coffee mug? Need help with the router again? Each one was its own kind of peace offering. And then, one Saturday morning, he showed up at my door with a look I hadn't seen in months. Tired, yes, but sure. He stood there for a second, rain dripping from his fringe, then said simply, "It's over." I didn't have to ask who he meant. "Chloe?" He nodded. Officially done. His voice was quiet, but not broken. She said she was tired of fighting for something that wasn't there anymore. I hesitated. "You okay?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not really, but I will be." And that was that. No drama, no shouting. Just the end of something that had already been ending for a long time. He stayed for hours that day. We didn't talk much about her, or about us. We just sat, drank tea, watched the rain run down the glass. Every so often he'd glance at me like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I didn't push. But campus wasn't as quiet as we were. Word travels fast when there's nothing else to talk about. The first whispers started in hallways. Small, harmless-sounding things. "Did you hear they're spending a lot of time together again? Thought he got back with Chloe." They were seen leaving the cafe together, late. It grew from there. Mutters at the library, glances at the cafe, a few cruel jokes from people who thought they were being funny. Jamie heard them too. Of course he did. You could see it in the way he started carrying himself again, shoulders drawn tighter, laughter shorter. His circle of friends, the ones he'd spent every Friday night with, stopped inviting him out. Slowly, invisibly, he was being pushed to the edges of the world he'd always belonged to. He didn't tell me at first, but one evening, I found him sitting on the steps behind the engineering building, hood pulled up, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "You don't smoke," I said softly. He gave a small, wry smile. "Guess I do now." I sat beside him, the cold concrete pressing through my jeans. The air smelled faintly of rain and tobacco. After a long silence, he said, "They're talking about me." "I know. They think I've changed." I turned my head, studying him. "Have you?" He looked down at his hands, turning the cigarette between his fingers. "Maybe. I don't even know what different means anymore." We sat like that for a long time, the smoke curling up into the night, the city lights flickering beyond the fence. "I shouldn't care what they say," he muttered. "I know that, but it sticks, you know? Every word, like someone scratching it into me." "You're human," I said. "It's allowed to hurt," he nodded, exhaling slowly. "It's easier for you, though. Easier. You've had time," he said quietly. "You figured yourself out, owned it. I'm still pretending I'm fine when I'm not." I didn't argue, because he wasn't wrong. He stubbed the cigarette out on the step and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm scared, Lewis. Not of them. Of me. Of what happens if I stop pretending and I don't like what I find." I looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Whatever you find, it's still you. Just a freer version." He gave a small, shaky laugh. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said, "but it starts with honesty." That night he came back to my flat. We didn't talk much. He fell asleep on the couch, fully dressed, the lamplight soft against his face. I sat there for a while, just watching the rise and fall of his chest, and realized that maybe this quiet, unspoken understanding was all either of us needed right now. From then on, he started visiting more often. Not every night, not like before, but enough. Sometimes he'd knock at midnight with 2 takeaway coffees. Other times he'd just text you up and show up without waiting for a reply. We fell into a rhythm again. Gentler this time. Slower. We didn't talk about what we were or weren't. We talked about everything else. Music, films, the smell of rain on warm concrete, whether the pigeons in Piccadilly Gardens were secretly immortal, and sometimes When the city quieted enough, the conversation drifted to deeper things. One night, he sat cross-legged on the floor, fiddling with an empty mug. "Do you ever wish you could switch your heart off?" "All the time," I said. He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be so bad, would it? Just," he snapped his fingers. "Click. No more confusion. No more guilt. But no more joy either," I reminded him. "No more moments that feel like breathing for the first time." He looked up at me then, eyes tired but warm. "You really think that's what this is?" "I think it could be," I said. He didn't answer, but the way he looked at me said enough. Rumors kept coming and going, as rumors do, until most people got bored and moved on. But some stuck. You could see them in the way people went quiet when he entered a room, or in the cautious smiles that felt more like questions. He noticed every one of them, and each time he seemed to fold a little further inward. One afternoon, we walked through the city, the air crisp with the first hint of spring. He stopped at a crossing, staring down the road. "You ever feel like everyone's waiting for you to explain yourself?" he asked. I shrugged. "Sometimes, but I stopped trying." "How?" "I realize they'll never hear what they don't want to." He nodded slowly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I wish I had your courage." "You do," I said softly. "You just haven't used it yet." It happened a few weeks later. The night that felt like the end of something and the start of something else. We'd been sitting in my flat, the window cracked open, the city humming below. The air smelled of rain and distant traffic. It was late. Too late for reason. "I told my parents today," he said suddenly. My head snapped up. "What?" "Not everything," he added quickly. "Just enough to make them worry." I smiled faintly. "How'd that go?" He gave a small laugh. "My dad told me to take it one day at a time. My mum said she loved me no matter what." "That's something," I said. "Yeah." He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. It felt lighter after, like breathing properly for the first time. We sat in silence for a bit, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then he turned towards me, his voice softer. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "You never pushed me, not once. Even when I was a complete mess, I blinked." "You didn't need pushing," he smiled, small but sincere. "No, I needed you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed. "Someone had to stick around," he nodded. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being the calm in all this noise." We didn't move closer. We didn't need to. The space between us was full enough, of trust, of history, of everything unspoken but understood. A few nights later, we ended up on the roof of his building. It was just before dawn, the sky still dark at the edges, but lightening in the distance. The city below was half asleep, the streets glistening faintly from an earlier rain. He leaned against the railing, mug of tea in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" "All the time," I said. He smiled. "But maybe this is how it's supposed to go." I didn't answer straight away. The wind brushed against us, carrying the faint hum of the city waking. He glanced at me then, his expression open, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know what I am," he said softly, "but I know this feels right." The world seemed to hold its breath. "Then that's enough," I whispered. He exhaled, like he'd been holding those words in for years. For a moment we just stood there, the light growing behind him, turning the sky pale gold. The first rays of sun slipped over the skyline, washing the city in quiet color. The rooftops, the windows, the puddles, everything glowed. He turned back to the view, his shoulders finally at ease. "You think people can ever really be free?" "I think freedom starts small," I said. "Sometimes it's not about shouting it to the world. Sometimes it's just choosing not to hide anymore." He nodded, eyes glinting in the new light. "That's what this feels like." We stayed there, watching the sun climb higher. The rain had passed, leaving the world clean and new. I didn't reach for his hand. He didn't need me to. The air between us was full of something quiet and unshakable. Not certainty, but peace. Maybe love didn't have to be loud or labeled. Maybe it could just be. As the city woke beneath us, I realized something simple and terrifyingly beautiful. Whatever we were becoming, it was real. And maybe that was the point all along. He turned to me one last time, the sunlight catching in his hair, and smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached his eyes, and in that golden morning, with the world still damp from the night's rain, I felt it. That fragile, steady thing we'd both been fighting for, freedom.